December 7th, 1941, a Sunday morning, shattered in seconds. Pearl Harbor burns, and America enters the war. For 4 young men, this day was not just war. It was the beginning of a story history tried to forget. Thousands of miles from the chaos of war. Four soldiers, sent into the mountains, climbing through blinding snow. They did not know what awaited them. Only that their orders would lead into a mystery the world was never meant to see. They vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions.
What really happened to them? Why did they disappear without a trace? And what secrets did the mountains hide for 75 years?
Before you settle in and grab your cup of coffee, make sure to like this video to support me.
And stay tuned for more stories on Vanished Stories. Listen closely. Here's what really happened. The story begins now.
December 7th, 1941. The world watched in horror as flames erupted from Pearl Harbor, dragging America into the brutal crucible of war. Yet thousands of miles from the smoke-choked chaos of the Pacific, a different kind of battle was unfolding, one shrouded in the glacial silence of forgotten peaks. 4 young soldiers, just ordinary men, received orders that would lead them not to a front line, but into a mystery that would defy resolution for 3/4 of a century. Their mission seemed deceptively simple: establish a remote observation post, a lonely vigil high in the rugged, unforgiving peaks of the Cascade Mountains. It should have been routine, a temporary assignment spanning mere weeks. Instead, they vanished without a whisper, leaving behind only echoes of unanswered questions that would haunt the military for decades, a chilling void in the annals of history. Then, in the year 2016, the mountains, long a silent guardian of secrets, began to yield. A team of mountaineers, pushing against the raw edge of the wilderness, stumbled upon an impossible discovery. Concealed for generations beneath shifting layers of snow and ancient ice, perfectly preserved by the mountain's brutal, indifferent embrace, they found it. A military shelter, a ghost of wartime past, untouched by the relentless march of time. Inside, equipment lay frozen in place, personal belongings told silent stories, and most crucially, evidence waited. Evidence that would, at last, reveal the agonizing truth of what befell those 4 men during one of the most savage winters on record.
What they unearthed was more than just the grim fate of forgotten soldiers. It was a testament to the indomitable spirit of human endurance against impossible odds, a harrowing saga of survival that no one had ever dared to imagine. This astonishing discovery wouldn't merely answer questions carried by families for 75 agonizing years. It would rewrite military history itself. For the truth they found was far more incredible, more heart-wrenching than anyone could possibly have conceived.
November 15th, 1941. The chill wind of an approaching winter bit at Staff Sergeant Michael Romano's face as he adjusted his pack for what felt like the 100th time. He stood outside the bustling military transport depot in Tacoma, Washington, a stoic sentinel against the backdrop of distant mountains. At 28, Romano was the anchor of this small, disparate group. A career soldier from the industrial heart of Detroit, he'd enlisted during the Great Depression, trading scarcity for the steady, if sometimes brutal, rhythm of military life. His hands, calloused and worn, bore the silent marks of action in the distant Philippines. His squad respected his quiet authority, a silent strength that commanded rather than demanded. Romano had volunteered for this mission, drawn by the allure of extra pay and a deeper, unspoken desire to serve his country in a unique, untamed theater. Beside him, Corporal James Henderson, a bundle of nervous energy, bounced subtly on the balls of his feet. At 22, Henderson was the team's voice to the world, a radio specialist whose natural, almost instinctive talent with complex communications equipment had propelled him through the ranks. A farm boy from the vast, open plains of Nebraska, his letters home painted this assignment as a grand adventure, a thrilling chance to see the majestic mountains he'd only ever glimpsed in the glossy pages of magazines. He'd made a solemn promise to his sweetheart, Mary. He'd be home by Christmas. The engagement ring, a sparkling symbol of their future, lay tucked safely in his footlocker back at base, a silent promise waiting to be fulfilled.
Private First Class Anthony Kowalski stood a little apart, a figure of meticulous focus. The son of Polish immigrants from the bustling streets of Chicago, Kowalski meticulously checked every buckle, every strap of his gear with the kind of precision that had made him the unit's undisputed best marksman. His reputation was built on dry humor and an uncanny ability to hit targets others couldn't even perceive. At 20, he was the youngest, yet his steady nerves and hawk-like eyes were invaluable for the critical observation duties ahead. The fourth member, Private David Chen, carried a different kind of weight. His presence in the unit was both remarkable and, in some quarters, controversial. As one of the few Chinese-American soldiers in the Pacific Northwest Division, Chen had navigated the subtle, insidious currents of discrimination. Yet his exceptional skills as a medic and his effortless fluency in multiple languages had earned him the unwavering respect of those who truly mattered. Born in Seattle's vibrant Chinatown, he was intimately familiar with the very mountains they were now being sent to monitor, having hiked their treacherous trails since boyhood. Their orders were stamped classified, yet the mission itself seemed straightforward enough. Military intelligence had identified several strategic observation points along the towering Cascade Range, ideal for small teams to monitor for any nascent enemy activity. With tensions escalating like a fever in the Pacific, coastal defenses were being bolstered, and these remote mountain outposts were to serve as the nation's earliest warning system against any aerial threats approaching from the west.
Colonel William Hayes, a man whose gruff voice seemed to echo the granites of the mountains themselves, briefed them personally in a stark, small command room. The assignment, he stated, was expected to span 4 to 6 weeks. Resupply missions would arrive every fortnight, carried by pack mules, weather permitting. Their mandate was clear: observe and report, nothing more. They were explicitly not to engage any potential threats, merely document, record, and radio their findings back to headquarters. Their assigned location was designated Observation Post Charlie, an isolated perch situated at a dizzying elevation of 7,200 feet, nestled within a remote ridge system approximately 40 miles northeast of the majestic Mount Rainier. The area was a fortress of nature, accessible only by a treacherous hiking trail that snaked its way through dense, ancient forests and across exposed, unforgiving rock faces. No civilian settlements dared to exist within a 20-mile radius of their desolate post. Their equipment list was exhaustive, a testament to the harsh realities of their destination. Military-issued tents, engineered to withstand the most extreme weather, lay folded beside sleeping bags rated for temperatures far below zero. A portable radio transmitter, their fragile lifeline to civilization, was carefully packed alongside signal flares, comprehensive medical supplies, and enough food rations to last a grueling 6 weeks. They carried standard-issue rifles, ample ammunition, and a single Thompson submachine gun, a grim last resort for emergency defense. Each man's pack, when fully laden, weighed a staggering 80 pounds, a crushing burden for the ascent. Weather reports for the coming winter hinted at a harsh season, but nothing unprecedented. The team had undergone rigorous cold-weather operations training, and all 4 men were seasoned veterans of wilderness survival. The military's confidence in their abilities was not misplaced. Their service records and specialized training spoke volumes.
On November 18th, the ascent began. The first day's hike was a relentless 12-mile push through an old-growth forest, following the skeletal remains of a logging trail long since abandoned. Henderson's radio crackled with regular check-ins. His voice, for now, cheerful and confident. Romano, ever the disciplined leader, maintained their pace with military precision, calling brief, necessary halts every hour to allow for rest and rehydration. By the second day, they had climbed beyond the protective embrace of the tree line, entering a stark, elemental terrain dominated by raw, exposed granite and stubbornly sparse vegetation. The weather, though clear, carried a sharper edge. Temperatures plummeted with every foot of elevation gained, a stark reminder of the wilderness they were now claiming. Chen, ever vigilant, treated minor altitude sickness in 2 of his teammates, administering oxygen and subtly adjusting their pace to mitigate the mountain's silent assault. November 20th brought them within tantalizing sight of their objective. The ridge system stretched before them, a massive, jagged spine of stone, its highest peaks already shrouded in the ominous clouds that promised the first heavy snow. Romano, with an expert eye, selected their precise position, balancing optimal visibility with crucial defensive positioning. It was a level area, naturally fortified by ancient rock formations, yet offering sweeping, unobstructed sightlines in multiple directions. With practiced efficiency, they established Observation Post Charlie. 2 robust tents were erected in a protected, natural cove nestled between colossal boulders, one for sleeping, the other a dedicated space for equipment storage and critical radio operations. A camouflaged observation blind, a masterclass in blending with the environment, was constructed from natural materials and military netting. It was strategically positioned to offer unobstructed, panoramic views of the deep valleys below and the labyrinthine mountain passes stretching westward. That evening, Henderson made successful radio contact with base, his transmission confirming their triumphant arrival and operational status. His log entry, dated 1847 hours, was clear, concise, and professional. He reported favorable weather conditions, excellent visibility, and, crucially, no unusual activity within their designated observation area. For the first week, their routine was a methodical, almost monotonous rhythm, broken only by the whispers of the wind. Dawn observations commenced punctually at 0500 hours, with 2-man shifts maintaining a constant, vigilant watch throughout the long daylight hours. Chen, drawing on forgotten wisdom from his childhood hiking experiences, supplemented their military rations with edible plants he expertly identified from the hardy mountain flora. Kowalski, his keen eyes and steady hand invaluable, proved exceptional at spotting elusive wildlife and, more critically, distinguishing between the innocent movements of nature and the subtle indicators of potential threats. Romano, the quiet authority, maintained unwavering discipline, ensuring all equipment was meticulously maintained and every security protocol rigorously followed. He had served in isolated posts before and understood implicitly the paramount importance of routine in preserving both morale and operational effectiveness during extended deployments in the wilderness. Their radio schedule dictated twice-daily check-ins at 08 and 1800 hours. Henderson's transmissions were a model of professionalism, consistently reporting weather conditions, visibility status, and any observations of note. Wildlife sightings, the occasional high-altitude aircraft passing overhead, and the distant telltale smoke from logging operations were all dutifully recorded and transmitted, each detail a thread in the fabric of their lonely vigil.
November 26th marked their first brutal encounter with the raw power of the mountains. A formidable Pacific storm system, a leviathan of wind and moisture, slammed inland, unleashing torrents of heavy rain that quickly turned to icy sleet. As temperatures plummeted, the wind began to howl through the mountain passes with a frightening, almost predatory intensity. Visibility, their most crucial asset, rapidly deteriorated to near zero, a suffocating whiteout. Henderson's evening transmission, a strained whisper through a curtain of static, was barely audible, yet he managed to confirm their position was secure and all personnel were accounted for. The storm raged for 3 relentless days, an unyielding siege that trapped the team within the fragile confines of their shelters. Romano, ever the pragmatist, rationed their precious fuel with meticulous care, acutely aware they could not afford to exhaust their heating supplies so early in what promised to be an interminable winter deployment. The men passed the long, isolated hours maintaining their equipment, updating their increasingly sparse observation logs, and sharing hushed stories from home, fragile fragments of the world they'd left behind.
By November 30th, the storm, finally spent, retreated, leaving behind a landscape utterly transformed. The peaks around them, once stark, now gleamed brilliant white under the morning sun, a pristine, almost ethereal tableau. The valleys below were swallowed by pristine, unbroken drifts of snow. Kowalski, despite the inherent dangers, marveled at the stark, brutal beauty. Chen, ever the realist, worried. The trail they'd used to reach their remote perch, their only path back to civilization, was now buried beneath several feet of newly fallen snow. Henderson's transmission that evening carried a palpable note of concern. He reported that while their immediate area remained navigable, the approach route for pack animals, their vital lifeline, would now be extremely difficult. He urgently requested confirmation of the upcoming resupply schedule and pleaded for updated weather forecasts. The response from base was, outwardly, reassuring. The resupply team, they affirmed, was fully aware of the challenging conditions and had contingency plans in place for winter operations. Weather reports, they added, suggested a brief warming trend in early December, which would, hopefully, render the approach more manageable. The team was instructed unequivocally to continue their mission as planned.
December 3rd brought the last successful radio transmission from Observation Post Charlie. Henderson's voice, clear and professional as always, delivered his routine report. Weather conditions, he stated, were stable. Visibility, excellent. No unusual activity had been observed. He confirmed their supply situation was adequate, and morale, against all odds, remained high. His final words, etched into the official log at headquarters, read, "All secure at Op Charlie. Next scheduled transmission, 08 hours tomorrow." But December 4th brought only silence. At 8 hours, radio operators at base waited. They strained their ears for Henderson's familiar, crisp voice. Instead, only static filled the airwaves, a chilling emptiness where his transmission should have been. Technical difficulties were not uncommon in mountain operations. A faulty antenna, atmospheric interference, or a temporary equipment failure could easily explain a missed contact. No immediate alarm bells rang. By 18 hours, however, a creeping concern began to tighten its grip. Henderson had never, not once, missed a scheduled transmission. Backup procedures, established for just such an eventuality, called for emergency signals if primary communications failed. Yet the silence was absolute. No faint distress calls, no desperate emergency beacon activations, nothing, absolutely nothing to indicate what might have befallen the remote observation post. December 5th dawned under clear skies, but with a bitter, bone-chilling cold that seemed to amplify the growing dread. Colonel Hayes, a man who had seen too much to easily panic, paced his office, poring over weather reports and radio logs with a mounting sense of unease. In his 20 years of military service, he had learned to trust his gut, and something about this profound silence felt deeply, fundamentally wrong. Henderson was by every measure the most reliable radio operator in the entire division. Equipment failures happened, yes, but rarely, if ever, without some form of emergency communication, some final desperate attempt to break the void. The decision to launch a search and rescue operation was not one taken lightly. Winter conditions in the Cascades were notoriously savage, a labyrinth of hidden dangers, and committing additional personnel to those unforgiving peaks carried significant, life-threatening risks. But 4 soldiers were missing, and the military, above all else, does not abandon its own. Hayes, his jaw set, authorized an immediate reconnaissance mission, to be followed by a full-scale search operation if circumstances demanded.
Lieutenant Thomas Bradley led the initial search team, a trio composed of 2 hardened mountain warfare specialists and a dedicated radio technician. They carried emergency medical supplies, additional radio equipment, and enough provisions to sustain a week-long operation. Their orders were stark, unequivocal. Reach Observation Post Charlie, ascertain the status of the 4-man team, and report back immediately. The search team departed at dawn on December 6th, a day that would forever be etched in history. Just 24 hours later, Pearl Harbor would be attacked, plunging America into a global war. They followed the exact route Romano's team had taken 3 weeks prior, but the landscape, in that short time, had been utterly transformed by winter's merciless grip. What had been a challenging, yet manageable trail was now a treacherous, almost impassable path through hip-deep snow and ice-encrusted rocks. Progress was agonizingly, impossibly slow. The conditions that had allowed Romano's team to cover 12 miles on their first day now devoured an entire day just to traverse half that distance. The searchers, their breath pluming in the frigid air, took turns breaking trail, each step a Herculean effort through snow that reached their waists in some areas. Every single step demanded excruciating attention, a constant battle against hidden crevasses or unstable, treacherous snow bridges. By nightfall, they had covered less than 8 miles, a paltry gain for such immense effort.
Bradley's radio report back to base that evening was sobering, a grim pronouncement. The weather, he reported, was deteriorating rapidly. Heavy snow had begun to fall, a thick, blinding curtain, and temperatures were plummeting far below zero. Wind speeds were escalating, creating dangerous whiteout conditions that rendered navigation all but impossible. The search team, battered but unbowed, established a makeshift emergency shelter and settled in to wait for morning, clinging to the desperate hope that conditions might improve. Instead, December 7th, the day of infamy, brought the worst blizzard the region had witnessed in decades. Visibility dropped to mere feet,
a suffocating shroud, and the relentless wind whipped the snow into towering drifts that threatened to bury their equipment and overwhelm their fragile shelter. Bradley, his face grim with the weight of command, made the agonizing decision to abort the mission and retreat to base. The harrowing retreat took 2 full days of dangerous, brutal travel through conditions that claimed the life of one searcher, who fell through thin ice while crossing a snow-covered stream, swallowed by the frigid depths. The surviving team members, frostbitten and utterly exhausted, finally reached base camp on December 9th. Their report was devastating. Reaching Observation Post Charlie under such conditions was an impossible feat, one that would inevitably lead to further, unacceptable casualties.
Meanwhile, the devastating attack on Pearl Harbor had thrown the entire military into a maelstrom of chaos and frantic reorganization. Resources that might have been dedicated to the perilous mountain search were suddenly desperately needed for urgent coastal defense and nationwide war preparations. The fate of 4 missing soldiers, once a pressing concern, became a tragically low priority, overshadowed by a national emergency that demanded immediate, overwhelming action. Additional search attempts were planned, meticulously charted on maps, but were repeatedly postponed. Each passing week brought worsening weather conditions, an unyielding winter that seemed determined to guard its secrets. January 1942 brought record-breaking snowfalls, rendering the mountain passes utterly impassable. February offered no respite, with temperatures stubbornly remaining well below normal and additional storms dumping fresh, heavy snow on already impossible terrain. By March, when conditions finally began to grudgingly moderate, the snowpack in the high country was measured at over 20 feet deep. Even the most seasoned, hardened mountaineers declared the area utterly inaccessible until late summer at the earliest. The 4 soldiers of Observation Post Charlie had been missing for 4 long, agonizing months. Buried somewhere beneath an ocean of snow and ice, forgotten by a world at war.
Spring finally brought with it a renewed, if fragile, hope and a more systematic, coordinated search effort. As the snow began its slow, grudging retreat in the lower elevations, search teams could at last access the outer approaches to the observation post's suspected location. Aircraft, their engines roaring, were deployed to scan the vast, white expanse from above, their eyes searching for any telltale signs of the missing team or their equipment. What they found was a landscape scoured clean by winter's unrestrained fury. The small meadows and clearings that had been visible just last November were now choked with massive, frozen snowdrifts and the chaotic debris of recent avalanches. Rock slides, unleashed by the thaws, had dramatically altered the terrain in several areas, and entire sections of the original trail had been completely washed out by the ferocious spring flooding. Ground teams, pushing against the lingering cold and mud, finally reached the approximate location of Observation Post Charlie in late June 1942, a harrowing 7 months after the team's disappearance. What they found there was both heartbreaking and utterly puzzling. The site where Romano had meticulously established their camp showed clear, undeniable signs of recent habitation, yet the evidence was confusing, fragmented, and maddeningly incomplete.
Scattered equipment lay half-buried in the tenacious snow and debris, a damaged radio antenna, tattered pieces of military canvas, a few empty, rusting food containers and personal items, including a pair of broken eyeglasses and a waterlogged notebook. But there were no bodies, no clear, definitive indication of what had befallen the 4 men, and most baffling of all, no signs of their primary shelter or their main equipment. The official investigation concluded with grim certainty
that the team had likely been caught in an avalanche or a savage storm, their remains entombed beneath tons of snow and rock. The scattered equipment, they posited, suggested a desperate attempt to abandon their position, perhaps during a sudden catastrophic weather emergency, only to be overwhelmed by the brutal conditions before they could reach any semblance of safety. Families, already reeling from the global conflict, were notified that their sons and husbands were presumed dead, killed in the line of duty during a classified military operation. Small, hushed memorial services were held. Flag-draped coffins containing only personal effects were laid to rest in hometown cemeteries, and the 4 soldiers silently joined the ever-growing, tragic list of World War II casualties. But questions, like persistent ghosts, lingered amongst those who had known the men personally. Romano was too experienced, too seasoned to be caught off guard by mere weather. Chen had grown up in these very mountains, understanding their treacherous dangers with an innate wisdom. Henderson was too disciplined, too meticulous, to abandon proper radio protocols without an overwhelmingly compelling reason. And Kowalski, the unit's finest marksman, was too skilled, too precise, to leave critical equipment behind without grave cause.
Some investigators privately harbored suspicions that the scattered equipment had been deliberately placed, a carefully constructed scene designed to create the illusion of an accident. The waterlogged notebook found at the scene contained entries that seemed stubbornly inconsistent with the established timeline of the team's disappearance. References to events that, according to official records, should have occurred after their last radio transmission raised uncomfortable, chilling questions about what had truly transpired during those final, silent days. Military records from the period were, for decades, classified and remained tightly sealed. The family's desperate requests for additional information were repeatedly denied, and any speculation about the team's ultimate fate was actively discouraged, even suppressed. The official story, a sterile narrative, remained unchanged. 4 soldiers had died in a weather-related accident while performing their duty in a remote mountain location. Case closed. Or so it seemed.
Over the ensuing decades, the mountains, in their slow, grinding way, occasionally surrendered fragments of the past. Hikers and climbers, pushing through the wilderness, reported finding isolated pieces of military equipment in the vast, unforgiving area. A corroded helmet here, a tattered piece of canvas there. Fragments of what might once have been part of a much larger untold story. But these discoveries were isolated, disparate, offering no new definitive insights into what had truly happened to the 4-man observation team. The area around Observation Post Charlie gradually morphed into something of a chilling legend among local mountaineers. Some claimed to have seen strange, unexplained lights dancing in the mountains during the fierce winter storms. Others reported stumbling upon ancient campsites that, despite their age, showed eerie signs of recent use, yet contained no modern equipment, as if time itself had faltered. A few swore they had picked up faint, ghostly radio transmissions in an old military code, broadcasting from impossible locations where no stations were ever supposed to exist. These stories were, for the most part, dismissed as typical mountain folklore, the kind of evocative tales that naturally proliferate around any location associated with deep mystery or profound tragedy. Yet they persisted, whispered down through generations of climbers and outdoor enthusiasts who knew the mountains intimately, and who, with an almost religious conviction, insisted something truly unusual, something profoundly unsettling, had transpired in that remote corner of the Cascades.
Military historians occasionally revisited the cold case, particularly as classified documents from the World War II era were gradually, painstakingly declassified.
But the files specifically related to Observation Post Charlie remained frustratingly incomplete, like a crucial puzzle with missing pieces. Key reports were absent, radio logs contained inexplicable gaps, and witness statements, when cross-referenced, were riddled with contradictions that simply could not be resolved with the scant available evidence. The four soldiers, their individual stories slowly obscured by the passage of time, gradually faded from public memory. Their names, once whispered with grief, were added to war memorials alongside thousands of other young men who had died serving their country. Romano, Henderson, Kowalski, and Chen became statistics in the vast, impersonal accounting of World War II casualties, their individual sagas tragically lost in the overwhelming, larger narrative of global conflict and national sacrifice. By the 1980s, the case had dwindled to little more than a dusty footnote in military archives, a forgotten, bureaucratic entry. The families who had once demanded answers, their voices now hoarse with time, were either aging or gone entirely. The few surviving relatives had, with heavy hearts, accepted the official, sterile explanation of a weather-related tragedy. The mountains, they believed, had simply claimed 4 young soldiers, just as they had claimed countless others over the pitiless decades. Case closed.
But the mountains, ancient and patient, kept their secrets with a profound difference from how bureaucrats kept their files. What had been buried beneath tons of snow and ice was not lost forever. It was preserved, held in a frozen time capsule, waiting for the moment it would finally, irrevocably reveal truths no one expected to find. Climate change, a slow, inexorable force, began to subtly yet profoundly alter the Cascade snowpack in ways that hadn't been witnessed for centuries. Winters that once brought towering 20-foot drifts now barely managed half that accumulation. Glaciers, ancient behemoths that had existed since the last ice age, began their alarming, swift retreat. And in the high country around what had once been Observation Post Charlie, decades of accumulated snow and ice began a relentless, irreversible melt. The first faint hint that something extraordinary was waiting to be discovered arrived in 2009. A group of geology students, conducting crucial research on glacial retreat, photographed what appeared to be artificial structures, stark and incongruous, emerging from a receding ice field. The images were unclear, taken from a distance, mere pixelated suggestions, but they distinctly showed geometric shapes that simply did not belong in the raw, natural landscape. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the sharp-eyed professor leading the research team, filed a report with the Forest Service, noting the unusual formations. But bureaucratic budget constraints and competing priorities meant no immediate investigation was launched. The photographs were filed away, another forgotten piece of documentation in an endless governmental process that moved at geological rather than human speed. 3 years later, in the heart of winter, a solitary climber named Mark Hendris was attempting a daring ascent of an unnamed, unforgiving peak. As the afternoon sun, low and weak, caught something glinting amidst the ancient ice, he paused. Investigating closer, his heart began to pound. He found what appeared to be metal debris, unmistakably man-made, stubbornly embedded in the glacial ice. The pieces were clearly artificial, yet their original purpose wasn't immediately obvious, obscured by the passage of time and the mountain's relentless embrace. Hendris, a modern explorer, photographed his discovery and posted the images on a mountaineering forum, a digital message in a bottle, asking if anyone could identify the mysterious objects. The response was immediate and intense.
Military history enthusiasts, their eyes sharpened by years of study, instantly recognized the distinctive shape of World War II-era equipment. Speculation ran wild: crashed aircraft, lost supply drops, forgotten military operations, whispered theories. But remarkably, no one connected the discovery to the 4 soldiers who had vanished 70 agonizing years earlier. Word of the find eventually reached retired Army Colonel James Patterson, a man who had dedicated decades of his life to meticulously researching unsolved cases from World War II. Patterson, unlike the online enthusiasts, recognized something in Hendriss's photographs that others had missed. The gear bore markings consistent with gear issued to observation teams in 1941. More importantly, the precise location matched a set of cryptic coordinates he had painstakingly unearthed from long-buried, recently declassified reports about missing personnel. Patterson, his heart thrumming with renewed purpose, immediately contacted Dr. Mitchell, sharing his profound suspicions about what might be truly hidden in the ice. Together, they launched a relentless campaign, petitioning the Forest Service for permission to conduct a proper scientific archaeological investigation. The bureaucratic gears ground slowly, agonizingly, for 2 long years. But in 2014, against all odds, they received authorization to systematically explore the site. The initial expedition, launched in the summer of 2014, was limited by both a shoestring budget and the ever-present threat of volatile mountain weather. Yet it yielded undeniable proof. Significant artifacts were indeed preserved in the ice. Military equipment, personal items, and what appeared to be structural remains were all tantalizingly visible, suspended beneath the translucent, frozen surface. The team meticulously documented everything they could safely reach, but the most promising discoveries, the heart of the mystery, remained locked within ice too thick, too ancient, to penetrate with their available tools. Funding for a full, proper excavation came from an entirely unexpected, yet deeply fitting source. The families of the 4 missing soldiers had, decades earlier, established a small memorial foundation. That foundation, a silent beacon of remembrance, still maintained a specific account designated for any future search efforts. Combined with crucial grants from historical preservation societies and forward-thinking military research organizations, enough money was finally raised to mount a proper, full-scale expedition. The 2015 team was a formidable assemblage of expertise. Archaeologists, military historians, seasoned mountaineering specialists, and, crucially, representatives from the families themselves, their faces etched with a fragile hope. They arrived armed with cutting-edge ground-penetrating radar, ice-melting equipment, and specialized preservation materials designed to protect any fragile artifacts they might recover. Weather windows in the high country are always brief, a fleeting grace. But they had a solid month to work before the inexorable approach of winter conditions would force their reluctant retreat. What they found in those first weeks exceeded everyone's wildest expectations. The ice had preserved not just scattered equipment, but an entire military installation, frozen in time. Tents were still standing, their guidelines taut, their heavy canvas fabric remarkably intact after 74 years of silent burial. Inside, sleeping bags lay arranged, as if their occupants had merely stepped outside from morning duties, ready to return. The radio equipment, Henderson's domain, was precisely where he would have positioned it for optimal transmission. His logbook sat open beside the transmitter, the final entry, chillingly dated December 3, 1941, clear and professional, documenting routine observations with no hint of the impending, unimaginable disaster. Personal belongings, each a silent relic, told the individual stories of the 4 men who had lived and worked in this frozen tomb. Romano's Certus revolver was found still in its holster, meticulously maintained, ready for immediate use. Kowalski's rifle, a tool of precision, was positioned in the observation blind, expertly zeroed and loaded, pointing toward a valley approach where he had been vigilantly watching for threats that, tragically, never materialized in the way they expected. Chen's medical supplies were organized with the clinical precision that had made him such an effective field medic. Bandages, medications, and surgical instruments were neatly arranged in a portable kit that could be deployed instantly in an emergency. A half-written letter to his family in Seattle was found among his personal effects, its faded ink describing the serene beauty of the mountain landscape and his unwavering confidence in their mission's success. Henderson's radio repair tools lay meticulously laid out beside the main transmitter, suggesting he had been in the midst of equipment maintenance when some unseen force, abruptly interrupted his routine. Technical manuals were open to pages describing cold weather operation procedures, and his most poignant personal effect, the engagement ring he had planned to give Mary, was found among his belongings, a silent, frozen symbol of a future that never arrived.
But the most remarkable, jaw-dropping discovery was the shelter itself. Hidden beneath the deceptively familiar military tents was a structure that defied everything investigators thought they knew about the team's final days. Built with ingenious craftsmanship from local materials and repurposed military supplies, it was unequivocally designed for long-term habitation. Stone walls, expertly dry-stacked, provided formidable wind protection. Ingenious ventilation systems, a testament to their survival instincts, prevented dangerous carbon dioxide buildup. Food storage areas were meticulously organized to maximize their extremely limited supplies, and sleeping areas were arranged with a primal understanding of efficiency, designed to conserve precious body heat. This was not the improvised camp of soldiers preparing for an emergency evacuation due to worsening weather. This was the deeply entrenched home of men who had settled in for an extended, potentially indefinite stay. Men who had adapted with astonishing resilience to their brutal environment, prepared to survive indefinitely. The evidence, stark and undeniable, suggested they had lived in this hidden fortress far longer than anyone had ever suspected, possibly enduring the entire brutal winter of 1941-42.
The mystery deepened, taking on a chilling new dimension when investigators uncovered a second radio, cunningly hidden within the main shelter. This was not standard military-issue equipment. It was a civilian receiver, repurposed and capable of monitoring multiple frequencies far beyond the reach of standard Army communications. Beside it lay a notebook, its pages filled with intercepted transmissions, decoded messages, and chilling intelligence reports that had never been forwarded to military headquarters. The intercepted communications, meticulously recorded in Henderson's careful hand, painted a picture of intelligence gathering that went far beyond the team's original mundane observation mission. They had been secretly monitoring Japanese radio traffic, tracking the ghostly movements of submarines along the Pacific coast, and diligently documenting aerial reconnaissance flights that had ominously preceded the Pearl Harbor attack by several weeks. Among Chen's personal possessions, investigators found detailed, hand-drawn maps of the coastline, intricately marked with suspected landing sites, defensive positions, and crucial strategic targets. These were not military-issued maps. These were highly specialized, handcrafted documents that revealed an intimate, terrifying knowledge of enemy planning that should have been utterly unavailable to a simple four-man observation team. The implications were staggering, sending a cold shiver through the researchers. Either these soldiers, isolated and alone, had discovered this critical intelligence information entirely on their own initiative, a feat of impossible deduction, or their mission had been far, far more complex, more clandestine than any official records had ever dared to indicate. The classified nature of their original assignment suddenly made chilling absolute sense. If they had been gathering vital information about imminent enemy action rather than merely watching for routine threats, their silence, their disappearance, took on a terrifying new context.
Henderson's radio logs, the official ones, contained no record of these deeper, secret transmissions. But his newly discovered private notebook revealed a hidden world. Coded messages sent to frequencies that did not correspond to known Army communications networks. References to contacts and clandestine operations that were utterly undocumented in official files. And, most disturbing of all, desperate requests for extraction that had apparently been denied or, even worse, deliberately ignored. The final entries in the team's documentation were dated in early February 1942, nearly 3 agonizing months after their last official radio contact with the outside world. They had not only survived the brutal winter that had claimed the life of one searcher and thwarted any rescue attempts, they had maintained their mission, continued gathering critical intelligence, and sustained themselves in conditions that, by all accounts, should have been fatal. But something had gone terribly, irrevocably wrong in those final desperate weeks. The last entries in their logs became increasingly frantic, a slow, agonizing descent into despair, documenting dwindling supplies, catastrophic equipment failures, and a suffocating, unbearable isolation. Chen's medical notes indicated with clinical detachment that at least one team member was suffering from severe frostbite and what he suspected was pneumonia. Food rationing had become critically severe, a slow starvation, and their precious fuel supplies were nearly exhausted. Temperatures inside the shelter, despite their ingenious conservation techniques, were plummeting to dangerous, life-threatening levels. The most haunting discovery of all was Romano's final report, scrawled in pencil on the back of a crumpled supply requisition form. It was addressed to his commanding officer, a final, desperate message never transmitted due to their radio's final, crushing failure. In it, he described their dire situation with the same calm, unyielding professionalism that had defined his entire military career. But the content was devastating, a testament to profound sacrifice. They had intercepted Japanese communications, unequivocally indicating a major offensive was planned against the West Coast. Submarine activity had increased dramatically, an unseen threat beneath the waves, and aerial reconnaissance flights were relentlessly probing American defenses on a daily basis, a chilling prelude to invasion. The intelligence they had gathered, Romano wrote, could potentially save thousands of American lives, prevent untold destruction. But their radio had failed irrevocably during a savage storm in January, severing their last tenuous link with the outside world. Romano's report meticulously detailed their desperate attempts to reach civilization on foot, but the deep, unforgiving snow and extreme weather had rendered travel utterly impossible. Chen, he noted, was treating cases of advanced frostbite and severe malnutrition. Kowalski had developed a persistent, hacking cough that strongly suggested pneumonia. Henderson, their vital radio specialist, had injured his leg during a fall while attempting a desperate, last-ditch repair of their antenna system. They were dying, slowly, agonizingly, in their frozen mountain fortress, surrounded by intelligence that could change the very course of the war, yet utterly powerless, unable to communicate with anyone who could act on the information. Romano's final words, scrawled with a steady hand, were a poignant request. that their families be told they had died serving their country, performing a mission that mattered more, far more, than their individual survival. The archaeological team, driven by an urgency that mirrored the original mission, worked in shifts around the clock, acutely aware that their precious window of opportunity was rapidly closing as winter, once again, approached the high country. Every single artifact, no matter how small, was carefully documented, meticulously photographed, and painstakingly preserved, each piece a silent whisper from the past. The shelter itself was mapped in precise three-dimensional detail, creating an enduring record of how 4 ordinary soldiers had ingeniously adapted to survive in one of the most hostile environments on the entire continent. Yet, even with this deluge of physical evidence, nagging questions remained. Questions that no amount of archaeological discovery could fully answer. Why had their intelligence reports never been forwarded to higher command? Who exactly had authorized their extended mission, pushing them far beyond the original, sanctioned timeline? And, most critically, why had no serious, immediate rescue attempt been launched until it was tragically, irrevocably too late to save their lives? The answers to those haunting questions began to emerge when Dr. Mitchell's team, pushing deeper into the frozen remnants of the shelter, discovered something that fundamentally altered everything they thought they knew about the 4 soldiers' fate. Hidden beneath Romano's final, desperate reports was a collection of documents, wrapped in waterproof military canvas, carefully sealed with thick, impervious wax. The preservation was so complete, so astonishing, that the papers inside looked as if they had been written yesterday, the ink still vibrant, the creases sharp. Inside these sealed packets were detailed intelligence summaries that painted a chilling, terrifying picture of what the team had actually discovered in those remote mountains. They hadn't merely been monitoring for potential threats, a mundane task. They had, by sheer accident or harrowing deduction, stumbled upon undeniable evidence of an active, sophisticated Japanese intelligence network operating with frightening impunity along the Pacific Northwest coast. Submarine landing sites, meticulously hidden supply caches, and clandestine communication networks had been established months before the attack on Pearl Harbor. A silent, insidious invasion. Chen's fluency in Japanese, once a mere notation on his service record, had proven invaluable, a lifeline in deciphering the torrent of intercepted transmissions. His translations revealed meticulously crafted plans for widespread sabotage operations, targeting the vital Boeing aircraft factories, the bustling shipyards in Seattle, and strategic bridges woven throughout the entire region. The 4 soldiers, isolated and alone, had uncovered a conspiracy that reached far beyond the scope of their original, seemingly simple observation mission. But the most shocking, the most gut-wrenching discovery of all was a handwritten letter from Colonel Hayes himself, dated January 15, 1942. The letter, addressed to Romano personally, revealed a horrifying truth. Military command was fully, agonizingly aware of the team's dire situation. They knew about the intelligence gathering, the extended mission timeline, and the desperate, life-threatening conditions at Observation Post Charlie. Hayes's letter was brutally honest, a raw confession of the impossible Solomonic choice facing military leadership. The intelligence the team had painstakingly gathered was absolutely critical to defending the vulnerable West Coast, a matter of national survival. But extracting them, launching a full-scale rescue would require a major, overt operation that could, with terrifying certainty, compromise their position and, far worse, alert enemy agents that their entire network had been discovered, unraveling months of painstaking work. The 4 soldiers, the letter coldly stated, were being asked to continue their mission indefinitely, knowing with chilling clarity that it would almost certainly cost them their lives. Romano's response, found in the same sealed packet, demonstrated the kind of profound, self-sacrificing courage that defined an entire generation. He acknowledged the impossible situation with a soldier's stoicism and accepted the assignment extension without a single word of complaint. But he made one request, a single, poignant plea that revealed the true depth of his leadership and humanity. He asked that if they didn't survive, if the mountains claimed them, their families be told they had died in a routine weather accident, not in a classified operation that would, for the sake of national security, remain a secret forever. Henderson, their indefatigable radio specialist, had, against all odds, managed to maintain intermittent, clandestine communication with headquarters throughout the brutal months of January and February 1942. But these transmissions were being conducted on frequencies so highly classified, so deeply secret, that no record of them existed in standard military archives. His final transmission, dated February 28, 1942, was a single, coded message, its brevity belying its immense weight. Mission accomplished. Recommend immediate action on intelligence provided. Personnel status critical.
The response, the last official communication the team would ever receive, came 3 days later. It was a brief, almost clinical acknowledgement that their intelligence had been received and was, at that very moment, being acted upon. Japanese sabotage networks throughout the Pacific Northwest were quietly, surgically dismantled in a series of swift, decisive operations that averted catastrophic damage to American war production. Submarine bases were raided, communication networks disrupted, and dozens of enemy agents were captured or eliminated. The 4 soldiers, isolated in their frozen mountain post, had, through their unimaginable sacrifice, single-handedly uncovered and helped dismantle one of the most sophisticated enemy intelligence operations ever mounted on American soil. Their quiet, agonizing sacrifice had potentially saved thousands of lives and protected critical military infrastructure during the most vulnerable period of America's entry into World War II. But the cost was devastating. Medical supplies had been utterly exhausted by early March. Food rationing had become so severe, so brutal, that the men were consuming barely 800 calories per day, a slow starvation. Fuel for heating was nearly gone, the cold now an enemy within, and temperatures in the shelter were dropping to dangerously lethal levels, even with their desperate, ingenious body heat conservation techniques. Chen's medical logs from those final harrowing weeks made for heartbreaking reading. He documented the progressive, agonizing deterioration of his teammates with clinical precision, noting the cruel symptoms of advanced malnutrition, relentless hypothermia, and respiratory infections that he was utterly powerless to treat without proper supplies. His own condition was equally dire, a testament to his selfless dedication. But his entries remained fiercely focused on caring for others until the very bitter end.
Kowalski's legendary marksmanship skills had evolved into something else entirely during those final, desperate months. His observation logs showed he'd developed an almost supernatural ability to detect movement and identify threats across vast, impossible distances. Even while weakened by hunger and the gnawing cold, he maintained a vigilant, unwavering watch over their position, documenting wildlife patterns and subtle weather changes with an obsessive, desperate detail. The most poignant, the most heart-rending discovery was Henderson's personal diary, a private testament kept entirely separate from his official radio logs. In it, he wrote letters to Mary, letters he knew with crushing certainty would never be sent. He described the desolate beauty of the mountain landscape, its brutal majesty, and his growing, profound understanding of what their sacrifice truly meant. He wrote about watching sunrises from their observation post, the sky a canvas of impossible colors, about the way moonlight reflected off the pristine, endless snow, about the profound, sacred silence that existed in places untouched by civilization. His final entry, dated March 15, 1942, was a whispered farewell. "If someone finds this someday, tell Mary I kept my promise. I said I'd come back by Christmas, and I will, just not the Christmas I was thinking of. Tell her the ring is in my pack, and that every day up here I thought about the life we were going to build together. Tell her I'm not sorry about staying. Some things are bigger than one person's happiness."
Romano's leadership during those final weeks was evident in every document, every artifact the team discovered. He had maintained discipline and, against all reason, morale, under conditions that were not merely impossible, but utterly dehumanizing, ensuring that each man continued performing his duties even as their situation became irrevocably hopeless. His final duty roster, dated March 20th, 1942, a mere week before the official disappearance, showed he was still meticulously organizing shifts for observation and equipment maintenance, a testament to unwavering duty, when most commanders would have long since declared the mission impossible to continue. The end, when it finally came, was both peaceful in its inevitability and utterly heartbreaking in its profound sacrifice. Chen's final medical entries described a gradual, merciful weakening that claimed each man in turn. Romano was the last to succumb, maintaining a silent, lonely watch over his fallen comrades until sheer, crushing exhaustion finally overwhelmed him. His body was found at the observation post, binoculars still clutched in his lifeless hands, his gaze fixed westward, toward the valleys he had protected with his final breath.
75 years after 4 young soldiers vanished into the silent, unforgiving embrace of the Cascade Mountains, their extraordinary story finally, tragically, came to light. What had begun as a seemingly routine observation mission, a footnote in the grand tapestry of war, transformed into something far, far more significant. It became a profound testament to courage, to selfless sacrifice, and to a sense of duty that transcended anything their grieving families could have ever imagined. Romano, Henderson, Kowalski, and Chen didn't simply die in a weather accident, a cruel twist of fate. They willingly gave their lives, protecting a nation that would never truly know their names or fully comprehend the immense magnitude of their contribution. The critical intelligence they gathered, the insidious enemy networks they helped expose, the catastrophic sabotage operations they prevented, all of it remained deeply classified, locked away in the annals of secrecy long after their deaths. Their families, left with only flag-draped coffins, mourned sons and husbands they believed had died in vain, victims of bad weather and worse luck. The truth revealed by the thawing ice was infinitely more profound, more heroic. These 4 men, isolated in a frozen fortress at 7,200 feet above sea level, had become, by their sheer will and ingenuity, an intelligence operation that fundamentally changed the course of America's entry into World War II. Their unwavering willingness to continue their mission, knowing with absolute certainty that it meant certain death, represented the kind of profound sacrifice that forged the very foundation of victory in the Pacific.
The discovery of their shelter didn't just solve a 75-year-old mystery. It unveiled heroes who had been utterly forgotten by history. erased by the demands of wartime secrecy. Men who chose duty over survival, honor over self-preservation, when the stakes couldn't have been higher, when the fate of a nation hung in the balance. Their story reminds us with a stark, brutal clarity that the greatest acts of courage often happen in silence, unwitnessed by the world, known only by the towering mountains that keep secrets far better than any government archive. In the end, Henderson did keep his promise to Mary, just not in the way anyone expected. He came home. He came home when the ancient ice finally, reluctantly released him, when climate change melted away the frozen tomb that had preserved their incredible sacrifice for 3/4 of a century. The engagement ring, that shining symbol of a shattered future, was still in his pack, waiting alongside the untold stories of 4 soldiers who proved unequivocally that some missions are worth any price. Their names are now etched in granite at Arlington National Cemetery, no longer missing in action, no longer forgotten. The mountain that claimed their lives also, in its cruel, magnificent way, preserved their legacy, ensuring that someday someone would find them and tell the world about 4 young men who saved countless lives by choosing to stay, by choosing to fight their lonely battle when they could have tried to leave.
Sometimes, the greatest discoveries aren't about what we find, but about the profound, humbling understanding that heroism comes in forms we never expect, hidden in places we never think to look, whispered by the winds of forgotten peaks.
Thanks for watching. We'll uncover the next mystery together in the next Vanished Story.